better, not only with regard to our language and with regard to how we have conversations with one another, but how we protect and support one another in more meaningful and measurable ways.
Michael.
All right. How you doing, David? Don't necessarily have so much of a question, but a comment and an observation here. And I've been reading this about Dave Chappelle. I haven't seen the special yet. One of the criticisms that he's getting is defense of comments that the baby made that people are saying were homophobic as well. And we know the baby got canceled and disinvited from different events. And the concern that I have is that when African Americans are dehumanized, whether it's in music, whether it's in specials called the N-word, B's, and things like this, the outrage doesn't take place to talk about removing that artwork that dehumanizes African Americans. But and very quickly here, so the baby got disinvited from different events and festivals for making homophobic remarks on stage that was not part of a song. It wasn't recorded, anything like that. But he got invited to the festivals after making songs that dehumanize Black people. And people are largely silent on that, okay? So see, that's the conflict that I have, okay? So, you know, that's my perspective on this.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And for me, the problem with the jokes and the presentation of this conversation via this big platform is that it affirms this lie that all Black people are cis, heterosexual, and think and operate in the same way, and all queer people are white. And that is a lie.
Right.
And so if we step back from that, the thing that I find frustrating is that most people are now engaging in this conversation without regard for the fact that, as Dave Chappelle referenced, the baby shot somebody in Walmart and then rapped about it in a song where he told his child, I would do it again. That is a problem. We talk so much about violence in the Black community. I want to offer a footnote. There are so many people who have been introduced to MBJC for the first time. Welcome to what we do. We're not new to this. We engage in similar conversations when we're talking about Tony McDade, the Black trans man who was murdered the same week that George Floyd was murdered by the Tallahassee Police Department. We show up and talk about and support Jasmine Koenig, a founder of this organization who has been in this space before, to talk about Ed Buck, a perpetrator of violence, systemic violence against Black, queer, and same-gender-loving men in particular. We show up and talk about this with regard to Nigel Shelby and Black students who are bullied and suspended. We agree in the space of wanting to ensure that all Black people can be free. For me, it's important to highlight for folks that don't have access to the information, who would never read a book about intersectionality, who don't know anything about Kimberly Crenshaw's groundbreaking essay mapping the intersections, to appreciate that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people. We have always been beautifully diverse. The issue with the special, and I encourage you to watch it, which is vexing for me in this space where I'm like, we shouldn't be continuing to talk about this, but it also provides us with opportunities to talk about this, is to simply say this. We agree. We're only having this conversation because Dave Chappelle says in the special, I care about Black people, and my issue is white supremacy. What is missed so often, particularly with regard to Mr. Chappelle's comedy, is that intersectionality is a thing. And there are Black, queer, trans, and non-binary and non-conforming people. And it is us, not white people. It is not white queer people. He talks about LGBTQ people as if they are white and talks about the movement that they are winning. It is them, white folks, who win, not us. When these jokes happen without this critical conversation, it is Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people who are victims of the kind of violence that he jokes about, who get beaten up because their Adam's apple is too large, or because their hands are too big, or because they do not show up in the ways that white people and the things that we all hold to this level of being the things that we should all do. When we are not able to achieve that, we are the victims of it. And that is the thing that I care most about. I also want to be clear that this is not about, to the extent that we can't cancel Dave Chappelle. Roland has made this apparently clear. He's been on Instagram with all of his friends. This is about us as Black folks who purport to care about Black folks doing better.
Kelly. First and foremost, thank you, David, for coming on and speaking about this. I'm a huge fan of yours. I follow you on everything. But I wanted to make clear how, and it's more of a comment than a question, but I would love your thoughts on it, how cancel culture has been just very conflated when it comes to accountability. I don't see this as being a canceling Dave Chappelle notion so much as it is the fact that all Black lives matter, and Dave Chappelle and other people who have the privilege of having a platform as large as Netflix need to be held accountable to the notion that all Black lives matter, that there are ways to be funny and to critique culture and to critique society without disparaging the most marginalized among us, especially within the Black community. And and finally, well, kind of finally, I saw a lot of comments over the past couple of days, and I want to make note that I have not seen the special, but his previous specials also touched on this, so I feel like I can say a little bit of it. But the fact that people are saying, oh, you're violating his First Amendment rights, et cetera, people forget that the First Amendment was made to protect the most marginalized voices among the American body. So the fact that we are still silencing the most marginalized within the marginalized community that is Black people by saying that, you know, that Dave Chappelle is able to say whatever he wants simply because he's a Black man, that is a disservice to not only Dave Chappelle and the LGBTQ plus community, but it's also a disservice to how the First Amendment is supposed to be exercised. So it's like, why is it that the most marginalized among us have to remain silent when the First Amendment is actually supposed to protect them?
I love you, and not just because you were singing my song, but because you were thinking critically. And I want to be clear that I don't expect, nor do I want people to always agree with me, but I do want us to be able to have conversations about how we do better to ensure that all of us can get free. And the thing that I've struggled most with is the hypocrisy of so many people who have continued to say to me, it's just a joke. I found it funny, therefore you should say nothing about it. If Dave Chappelle had the freedom to make jokes, as he will clearly continue to do, I and other people should have the freedom to say, I watched the special twice over. I also know that this is not new, and I didn't find it funny. And two truths can exist at the same time. Beyond that, to your point, Kelly, I will continue to say that my issue and interest is in ensuring that all of us can be free. We are now actively having a fight, a conversation that hopefully will lead to us being able to pass the Equality Act. And the issue for me is that too many Black people consider the Equality Act a gay piece of legislation, something that will benefit white gay people or LGBTQ people generally, because again, the assumption is that all gay people are queer. And the reality is it's a civil rights piece of legislation. It addresses fundamental gaps in legislation that exist around the pieces of legislation that most Black people will name when they talk about the things that they care most about with regard to civil rights, right? This includes things like ensuring that Black women cannot be fired because of the way that they wear their hair, ensuring that all of us cannot be kicked out of a rideshare like an Uber or a Lyft because of the way that we show up in the world. I care about Black people. I really don't care as much about what George Carlin has to say or Rosie O'Donnell. What I care about is acknowledging that in this moment, there is someone who has an extreme platform, who has an extreme amount of wealth, an extreme amount of privilege, who purports to care about Black people. And I'm simply saying that if you purport to care about Black people, I would like to know if you actually care about all of us. And for me, that's the question that is being pressed at this moment. Heretofore, it has been possible for folks to say, I care about Black people, and that be code word for saying, I care about some of us. Those of us who show up in the ways that affirm me and the way that I make sense of the way that I show up in the world. The question now is, do you care about all of us? And here's the thing, we can disagree. You can say to me, I only care about Black cis straight folks. I only care about Black folks from New York. And that's fine. I just need to know where you are because there is so much more work to do to ensure that we can all be free. That's my goal.
Thank you.
David Johns, National Black Justice Coalition. We surely appreciate it, David. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way. Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Like, wow, Roland was amazing on that.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig? So yesterday, Dr. Cleo Monago sent me a text message asking me were we going to be weighing in on this Dave Chappelle issue. I said, sure. He joins us right now. Cleo, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Mr. Martin. How are you?
Man, where are you? You in the basement somewhere? I can barely see you.
Yeah, can you see? I'm sorry about that. I'm in South America at a hotel because I'm presenting to the faculty of the University of San Buenavista in Cali, and I didn't know I was going to be doing this, so I didn't bring lights and camera with me, so I'm doing the best I can do.
All
Can
right.
you see me at all, though?
All right, it's all good. Yeah, we can see you. We can see you. Let's get right to it, Cleo. You wanted to weigh in on this issue. You sent me a text, a long text. I said, man, that's too much typing. Say that on TV. You heard the interview there with David. You've seen the stories. Folks saying, drop the special, get rid of the special. Dave Chappelle is wrong. He should not be making these comments. Your take.
Okay, well, like you said, my message was long, so because this is a very dimensional issue. I appreciated some of what David said, which I think was provoked by the conversation here, because what he was talking about previously that I first saw was a part of what we're talking about as cancel culture, and for Netflix to cancel David Chappelle's The Closer. And I finally saw it. I mean, when I first heard about this controversy, I hadn't seen it yet. I finally saw it this morning. And my perspective after I saw it was definitely I don't support the show being canceled. One of the things that was said in your conversation with David is about the importance of us having conversations, and I've been saying that for a while, that we need to be having Black, acculturated and informed conversations about these issues. I think the reason that David Chappelle talks about LGBTQ and queer and all that as white, because white people are its foundation, white culture is how it's rolled out, and the people that lead it in this country that have the most power are particularly whites. Black people are marginalized by that community, and one of the things that David Chappelle talked about in one of his previous stand-ups was that reality. But what I want to focus on here is that I care about everybody, Black. I care about Black trans people and what's been happening among trans Black people. That 21 that was identified as murder. I care about the 9,013 Black people who were murdered at large, 8,469 Black men, 1,440 Black women, and the 21 trans people that we know about who have been murdered. They all matter to me. But what's being ignored, and frankly, I think the gay paradigm encourages the ignoring of Black contextual historical issues, is that David, regardless of his millions and et cetera, is someone who cares about Black people and Black life. And one of the things that he said at the very ending of his program was empathy should go both ways in terms of Black people and the LGBTQ white-led community, and toward Black people. There should be empathy both ways, and historically there has not been. And that community has been known to be marginalizing of Black issues, Black concerns, and it encourages Black people to go along with its agenda and its perspective instead of addressing contextual and cultural issues. And that's what comedian David Chappelle is trying to do. And I emphasize that he's a comedian because he's not a social scientist. He's not a behavioral health scientist. He's not a history major. He doesn't know the facts about the human story here. He probably does not know the issue of gender and gender nuance from an African perspective because that's not his background. So he's an American citizen who's talking about what he sees. And what he sees, which is because he's not blind, is an LGBTQ community that's white-led and practices racism. For example, and there's tons of them. In California, when Ed Buck did what he did, the white gay community knew about it because it had been reported, and they didn't come up in arms against the murder of Black men at Ed Buck's home. And I got tons of examples of that community not being supportive of Black people. But I want to get back to some issues that David raised so people won't get confused, because David said over and over again that Black people are queer, Black people are trans, Black people are et cetera. This is a diverse community. I have a relatively large following online as well, and there are lots of trans, same-gender loving, et cetera, people who support David Chappelle's perspective, who doesn't have the perspective of the National Black Justice Coalition. Some of them look at this through the lens of being Black. And what I mean, again, by that is David Chappelle is an advocate for the defense and empowerment and justice for Black people. And I believe that includes Black men, women, and everybody else. And as a result of us not considering that and looking at this simply from a gay defensive lens, we're not even looking at the fact that if you look at his special from the whole context, he had a very endearing and loving story about a trans friend of his. And that's not being talked about among the people who are critiquing him. And the very few times it is referenced is poo-pooed because, frankly, there's a tendency in this society to poo-poo what Black men say, whether they're millionaires or not, because this is an anti-Black society that does attack Black men. And I'll finish this tangent with this because I hope to respond to questions. One of the things that clearly concerns David Chappelle is Black manhood. And one of the things that I want to talk about at some point is the underpinning of why there's anxiety. I mean, he did a lot of bashing, if you will, around masculine traits of some trans people and made fun of it, which I found disturbing, and I understand contextually why people who are struggling, because transgender people struggle. Transgender people are bullied. Transgender people, well as all kinds of other Black people, frankly, at larger numbers, are murdered and killed. But focusing on this issue, there are situations that lead to the death of trans people, and there's teasing and bullying and a misunderstanding or judgment around being too male, too female. All this stuff is actually occurring. But canceling the likes of David Chappelle cancels the opportunity to have a conversation about some of the things that's really causing Black people, including David Chappelle, anxiety along these lines. We're concerned about the emasculation of Black men. We're concerned about if what all Black men have gone through historically has led to gender confusion. I'm not saying that is my perspective. My perspective is nuanced, and I don't want to get into that now unless it comes out of some questions. But there's some, he's known, David Chappelle is known for being one of the comedians who was given a whole lot of money to put on a dress, and he said no. And instead of engaging meaningfully from a Black perspective why he said no, and what he was worried about, he was simply called femophobic, homophobic, transphobic. And that's what the LGBT community does, even when Black people take on that paradigm. We don't engage Black anxiety and perspective around these issues to be educated about what's really going on. And if we did talk about the anxiety among Black people regarding the compromise of Black men, the impact of police brutality, the impact of castration, whether it was physical or social, all of these attacks on Black males, and now the particularly Black and male cancel culture. This is causing a rise in black people, some anxiety that is not being engaged and unpacked. Instead, folks are calling people homophobic and transphobic and canceling them. And just like with the baby, as I said when I talked about that, instead of getting on the baby's case simply and marginalizing him or re-marginalizing him like this country tends to do to black men, we should have said, why did you say that? What inspired that perspective? What made you feel compelled at a concert that was not about homosexuality or sucking penises in the park? How did that come to mind for you, Jonathan? That's his real name. And the answer to that question, if he could actually bear them, would be very educational about what black people are going through, what black men are going through, what the anxiety is about this emasculation issue among black men, which is at the core of some of David Chappelle's anxieties in comedy.
All right, got it. Questions now from panelists. Tammy, first. And folks, I need tight questions, tight answers. Tammy, you're first.
Thank you, Roland. And thank you, Roland, for giving us all this platform. I wanted to just ask you, how do you reconcile the fact that there have been other people that give underrepresented groups a voice and a platform who may have themselves been under the scrutiny of trying to be canceled, but people are not talking about that and the work that they've done to enhance Black culture, similar to Dave Chappelle?
Is your question is why is the cancellation of other people not coming up? Is that your question?
Well, the attempts to cancel other people who have actually done good for the Black community, when I don't believe that anybody with a wide platform, with a large following, is intentionally trying to alienate the LGBTQ community.
Well, let's put Mr. Chappelle in context. He's a comedian. People like him and Paul Mooney and others are allowed to tell some hard truths because it's going to be a punchline afterwards, and it's in the context of laughter, which is why he gets away with talking about such serious issues on a large platform. He is a comedian. We don't have people like Dr. Tommy Curry and other people who could break these issues down and could actually transform the Black community's behavior and consciousness, including the treatment of Black people who get a large platform. Instead of even canceling them, they're not even allowed in the door. The other people that you're talking about who are being canceled, whenever something affirms Black people, like the Arsenio Hall show did inadvertently, and other situations where Black people are affirmed, they are indeed canceled. And people from the LGBTQ community, et cetera, don't raise that issue, including a lot of Black people who have a profile. They wait till the LGBTQ issue comes up, and white people give them lots of profile and support so they can actually talk about their agenda, which is the LGBTQ agenda, which is pretty much acculturated as a white agenda. But I agree with you if I hear what you're saying, that there's an issue of Black people being canceled, period, and we should be concerned about that. But we should be more than concerned. We're relatively passive in the midst of our disrespect. The reason we're hearing so much about David Chappelle is because the force behind him is huge. It's called the white gay community, and they have a huge machine. So as someone said, I think Roland said earlier, this use of the N-word. We can add the B word. We can add all kinds of words that are insulting and divisive that he says that hurts Black people in particular, like the N-word, that gets no critique. There's nobody trying to cancel over that. Well, that's white supremacy behavior. It needs to be looked at as well.
Thank you.
Michael, your question.
Cleo Monagos, Michael Imhotep. Yeah, that was me earlier talking about the N-word. So this is my critique here, and you can comment on this. With the baby being canceled, disinvited from festivals for talking 2 minutes, homophobic rant, but has songs dehumanizing Black people, he gets invited to the festivals. Dave Chappelle gets attacked for comments about transgender people, things like this, but no critique. No comments about him using the N-word, things like this. Talk about how is it that Black people are the only ones who you can say anything you want to about, whereas anybody else, when you talk about them, you get out of pocket their consequences and repercussions.
As I mentioned earlier, Black people do not have the relentless, focused, unified funded, and resource machine that the LGBTQ community has as a result of white people in white spaces with white privilege and white audacity creating that space. And I want to say, so I won't sound dismissive, that the white gay community exists, including with all its privilege, in response to having been profoundly oppressed once upon a time in this country, murdered and killed and harassed and locked up. So it's not that their behavior and their subjectivity is not warranted. However, it doesn't include issues that are relevant to Black people. But the bottom line is, we don't have the machine. White supremacy has created a lot of conflict, a lot of people on different sides, including the LGBTQ identify and the Black side, which is a bunch of Black folks who should be getting together to resolve our issues across our collective. But we jump on bandwagons that get a lot of support sometimes because it's where the action is, it's where the money is, it's where the support is, where the media attention and where you can get some press. But that's what it is. When Black people unlearn internalized white supremacy and learn to value diverse Black voices and create a machine that actually will take no prisoners regarding what happens to diverse Black people and are consistent and build institutions with that intent, like GLAAD and HRC does for gay people, particularly white people, we will have the same benefits, but we don't have that. We're divided. We have people who are powerful and who are doing great things within our community, but they don't get press. Not unless white people are benefiting from what we do, the press doesn't come.
Right. All right. Thanks, Cleo.
So I understand your point, but I'm failing to draw the correlation between what you've said and what David Johns brought up and what I've brought up and other people who have an issue with Dave Chappelle's remarks, in that while he was, making remarks against white supremacy and the like through his comedy and his commentary in this special, the problem isn't that he was just talking about the white LGBT plus community. It's the fact that in so doing, it's harming the Black people within that community. So again, this is a marginalized within the marginalized community saying, hey, this actually hurts me more than my white counterpart. Can you stop? And yet and still we have people literally just saying no and screw you. So how do you reconcile the fact that it's Black LGBT people saying this is hurting me? We are the ones who are actually going to be impacted by his commentary the most because he's a Black man. How do you reconcile them actually pleading with the cis-het community, myself and you and others? How are we to basically take them under the wing that is Black people and let them know that we care?
All right, well, that's a lot. And that's a very important question, though. It's a lot. But let me tell you this, or let me explain this. Let me reiterate that I care about all Black people. And my work, not abstractly, but directly affirms same-gender loving, trans, and bisexual people, along with the rest of the Black family. So we're not in any kind of conflict regarding the importance of affirming people who are same-gender loving, et cetera. But a word that you mentioned is key. You talked about that Black people are being harmed. Now, before I get to how universal the harm is, I want to mention to you that David is a powerful, articulate brother who came on here and raises issues. And David is one person, just like I'm one person. There's not no one perspective on this. There's lots and lots of same-gender loving, including trans people, who are not bothered by Dave Chappelle, who indeed support Dave Chappelle. The white transgender person who committed suicide that he referenced, their family openly supports David Chappelle. So, and there's another well-known comedian named Flame Monroe, who's transgendered, who supports David Chappelle. So I want to make it clear that this is not a monolithic perspective. The National Black Justice Coalition is one organization, and there's other organizations with different perspectives, including the Black Men's Exchange, which doesn't share in terms of absolute precision to perspective of National Black Justice Coalition. What we agree is that same-gender loving people, et cetera, trans, et cetera, should not be harmed. It should be allowed to be free. We agree there. However, the platform and the container in which we get to that point, we disagree with. I want to make sure that I talk about the harm. And I almost got emotional when I said that. In short, in short, the white LGBT community and its paradigm prowess in politics has done harm to Black people. If you do a study of HIV and AIDS, and there's many other examples of how white gays wrote out the HIV and AIDS epidemic in terms of care and resources, they marginalized Black people, and by that act helped to create a epidemic that could have been further resolved if we were not put out by the white gay community. I can go on and on and on about the racism in the white gay community in terms of harm being done to Black people. What David Chappelle is talking about as well is harm being done to Black people. One of the powerful things that he says is, would you please stop punching down on my people? That's one of the final comments that Dave Chappelle says, actually after he had contextualized it quite clearly before he even said that throughout his hour and a half special. The harm is being done. And David Chappelle is concerned about that harm. Now, David Chappelle, to my knowledge, is not a same-gender loving or bisexual man. He made some inferences, I should say, during his interesting sexual inferences around glory holes, et cetera, during his stand-up. But he doesn't understand the nuances, the experience of same-gender loving people. What I think we should do, as I suggested with the baby or Jonathan Kirk, is that we should use these high-profile stimulations of the conversation to finally, collectively, as a people, have a rational, Black-informed, Black-acculturated, historically considerate, contextually considered conversation about what's going on with the Black community, what's causing such a spectrum of perspectives, what is causing even a perspective that the baby articulated and that David Chappelle talked about. Instead of doing what white supremacy keeps doing, co-signing the dismissal and re-cancellation of a Black male voice, particularly one as powerful and as brilliant as David Chappelle has been with the Chappelle show and other things that he's done, has been particularly powerful for Black people, which is why he had to walk away from the show, because white folks said, no, we got to control this. We got to control you. You're not letting us control you. We'll give you $50 million because y'all like money if you let us control you. And he said, no. That's powerful. So we need to be using him as somebody that we can go to or include in a larger conversation about Black bridge building, about Black people unlearning impulses that are anti-SGL or anti-trans or that are not considerate of gender nuance. We can talk about these issues we can talk about gender nuance from an African perspective and do a whole lot of educating. The reason I'm here in Colombia is I'll be speaking at the University of San Buenaventura in Cali, a predominantly Black city, about the epistemology of ancient African gender nuance versus contemporary gender constructs. Because they're having issues around manhood and masculinity and that anxiety which causes abuse of feminine people, particularly if they're male, that they want to help unpack and resolve. So this gender issue, which is a core underpinning of David's anxiety, we have to have a Black conversation about all these issues and include our diversity in respectful ways so we can resolve the conflict, not cancel people. And we should be able to critique. One thing that David said that I agree with is that we should have the opportunity to critique each other.
All right, Dr. Cleo Monago, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks for your perspective. We shall see what happens, but like I said, Dave made it clear last night, he does not care about people saying cancel him. He was real clear. Thanks, Cleo.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all.
Folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way. Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Like, wow, Roland was amazing on there.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
You dig?